Good afternoon and welcome to the Landscape Conservation Catalyst Fund webinar. My name is Emily Bateson, and joining me today are Melly Ruling, Deputy Director of the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, and John Peterson, our Catalyst Fund Manager. During this call, we will spend about 15 to 20 minutes providing an overview of the network and the Catalyst Fund, and the remaining time will be dedicated to responding to any questions you may have. We'll start with a series of questions submitted via the registration process, and then we will turn to questions that you submit during the webinar itself. To submit questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A icon on your webinar toolbar. If you're having any difficulties, please use the chat icon to direct questions to John, who will work with you to resolve any problems. Some brief background. The network formed in 2011 to help support and advance the growing field of collaborative landscape conservation. We work to connect practitioners to the best resources, tools, and to each other so that we can all continue to learn collectively and innovate in the field. Our geographically diverse 34-person leadership team has representatives from the nonprofit, academic, private landowner, tribal, and state and federal agency communities in the US, Canada, and Mexico. The network is a fiscally sponsored project of the Center for Large Landscape Conservation in Bozeman, Montana, who is also administering the fund. Our website highlights a number of resources and initiatives that you can find in your own work, including our bi-monthly e-bulletin, a survey we conducted of landscape conservation initiatives in 2017 that highlights a number of important trends in the field, and Pathways Forward, Progress and Priorities in Landscape Conservation. This report captures the strategic thinking, inspiring case studies, and recent innovations in the field from the National Forum on Landscape Conservation, a gathering of 200 landscape in 2017. This catalyst shift in conservation. People are increasingly working at the larger landscape scale, the scale nature functions, and people are working collaboratively in community-grounded partnerships to do so. Cross-sector, place-based collaboration is the linchpin of effective landscape scale conservation. This horizontal partnership approach has proven highly effective, but such collaboration takes considerable time and effort, and funding for the collaborative process that leads to enduring conservation outcomes has been scarce. The purpose of the Catalyst Fund is to address this central need and to support the key building block activities and collaborative processes that move collaborative landscape conservation partnerships forward. The fund is made possible through generous funding from the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. The Catalyst Fund has two primary eligibility criteria. First, applicants must be 501c organizations, and they must be within the 50 United States. Second, applicants must be or be applying on behalf of a landscape conservation partnership. Now, an important note here, we recognize that most partnerships are informal, and few, if any, will be 501c3 organizations. We anticipate that most applicants will apply on behalf of a partnership because they are the fiscal sponsor organization of the partnership, or the recognized lead convener of the partnership, or a recognized partner organization within the partnership. Other involved partners, such as tribal governments, academic institutions, other nonprofits, may work on funded grant activities as paid contractors. We recognize that there is a wide spectrum of landscape conservation initiatives emerging and underway across the country, and not all initiatives, regardless of their broader importance or relevance, will meet the landscape conservation partnership definition in the Catalyst Fund. As specified in the program description and RFP, for the purpose of the Catalyst Fund, we are defining landscape conservation partnerships as place-based, focused on a shared long-term vision, collaboratively governed, inclusive, and informed, committing to building the shared foundation of knowledge necessary to achieve its conservation goals. We have more language in the RFP regarding these definitions, as you can see on this slide, and we recommend that you read this section and also the FAQ very carefully. Strong proposals to the fund will come from place-based partnerships with clearly identified conservation vision and goals. They will have clearly articulated grant period objectives for building the partnership and advancing those conservation goals. They will focus on proposed activities that best achieve those objectives. And they will articulate how the grant will significantly advance partnership goals and catalyze forward momentum. We're not looking for one-off grant projects. We're looking for how will this fund help you build an enduring partnership and move towards your conservation goals on the ground. The Catalyst Fund Appendix identifies 3 stages of partnership growth: starting, building, and conserving. And the fund targets landscape conservation partnerships, particularly in the building stage. We want to see partnerships where people have spent the time to build trust, establish relationships, and develop a vision and goals statement for their shared landscape. This stage, the building stage, is often the stage at which the volunteer time of participants is no longer enough to sustain and build the partnership, and when funding to advance the collaborative process and specific building block activities will land on fertile ground, solidifying group momentum and accelerating forward progress. We have included a common steps to collaborative landscape conservation success chart as an appendix to the general RFP. Please explore this chart for more information and to get a better sense of what we're calling the building stage of partnerships. The intent is to highlight best practices of successful partnerships to date, as captured in practice and in the literature. The chart is meant to be helpful, but not prescriptive. Applicants should tell us in their applications what they think will be the most impactful set of activities they can do on their own landscape during the grant period to build their partnership and achieve forward momentum towards their goals. For the 2019 grant cycle, the Catalyst Fund will consider 2 types of proposals. A general Catalyst Fund RFP is open to all eligible landscape conservation partnerships in the United States. We also have an Indigenous Community Catalyst Fund RFP, which is open to all eligible landscape conservation partnerships that are Indigenous-led and primarily serving Indigenous communities. The Catalyst Fund is pleased to have a portion of the fund dedicated to Indigenous-led partnerships that serve Indigenous communities working on landscape conservation. Indigenous collaboratives are often rich with qualities that embody and enhance landscape conservation, including a multi-generational approach, the use of traditional knowledge, the integration of other important societal issues, and a value system that prioritizes symbiotic health between the landscape and its inhabitants. Such partnerships could focus on a landscape that is wholly on sovereign tribal lands, or that includes adjoining lands due to the boundaries of an ecological landscape or other societal considerations, and or that focuses on advancing and conserving Indigenous interests, territories, and rights across a specific landscape. Objectives for both programs are the same, but applicants that meet the eligibility criteria for the Indigenous Community RFP can apply through a separate, more streamlined application process. And both processes can be found on our online portal. Another small difference is that match funding is desired, but not required for the Indigenous community applicants. In the general RFP, a minimum one-to-one match is required. 50% of that can be an in-kind contribution. If you work with Indigenous communities but do not strictly meet the criteria of that RFP, please apply under the general RFP. Applicants can request from $10,000 to $25,000 in total and can submit either a 1-year or 2-year proposal. We will have an annual grant cycle, but no one grantee is currently eligible for more than $25,000 total over the first 3 years of the program. So please note the grant cycle timeline. We will be accepting pre-proposal submissions through April 26th. To apply, please register on the network's online application portal and complete the pre-proposal form there. If you have any questions or challenges using the portal, please contact us by email. Also, please note that PDF versions of the 2 pre-proposals are now posted on our website for your convenience. Also, please note that when you use our online portal, we've tried to keep the pre-proposal process very streamlined, but there is a preliminary but separate budget form. And on that form, you will note that indirect costs are capped at 12%. So applicants should review the applicable RFP for more details. Specific examples of what Catalyst Fund monies can be used for include staff and or contract support for convening, coordination, moving forward the many collaborative tasks and processes involved in building a partnership. And monies can also be used for direct associated project costs, such as communications and outreach activities, convening costs, planning, mapping, exercises, and other. As you see on the screen, there's also a list of specific activities the funds cannot be used for, so please review the RFP carefully. That concludes the webinar presentation. I'm going to turn now to questions submitted during the registration process, and then we'll move on to questions that you've submitted during the webinar itself. We have quite a few questions, and I hope this will be helpful. Can you provide clarity on the distinction between the building and conserving phases within the RFP? And what is the likelihood of funding for a partnership that is in the starting phase? So I'll start by saying we talked to experts across the country in developing this fund, and where in different geographies and different sectors, everyone we talked to said, do not fund at the starting stage. There is a certain amount of trust building, relationship building, sitting around the table, identifying if you have shared goals, and want to, in fact, move forward with building a partnership. And there's a certain amount of sweat equity that should really come from the participants who've chosen to sit around that table. And it's a little bit too much venture capital for an outside funder to come in at that stage. But as I mentioned earlier, there comes a point in the partnership where you've moved beyond what you can do on a volunteer basis. There are conservation processes you want to move forward. There are new stakeholders you want to do outreach to. And there's, at this point, funding can be harnessed effectively. The line between building and conserving is subjective. I suggest you look at the chart. Feel free to contact me if you continue to have questions. Again, the chart is not definitive. It's meant to showcase for you the kind of thinking we've done, the kind of best practice thinking that's been done in the field, and encourage you to do that same kind of strategic thinking. What are your steps to success? And what are the most impactful set of activities you can do at this point? We would not anticipate working at the conserving stage, for example, helping you do an actual conservation acquisition deal, for example. So again, it's subjective, and John and I would be happy to field questions by email on your individual applications. Number two, are there any regions, species, types of landscapes that will be prioritized? For example, are untouched landscapes given preference over highly impacted or urban landscapes? We actually believe that all landscapes are important to the people who live there, and that their ecosystem service values and their cultural values should be conserved, and that collaborative partnerships, community grounded, are the way that's going to happen across the US. There are wonderful urban partnerships, there are wonderful remote partnerships, and we are an equal opportunity funder in that regard. Is there a specific geographic scale that the Catalyst Fund targets? Not necessarily. I think your partnership should be crafted by the people who live on the landscape at the scale that you feel will be effective. We know that many partnerships are nested at multiple scales. And so we sort of like t-shirts. We'll take partnerships in any size that you have created as effective for the place where you live. If we're working on a conservation issue on a statewide basis, are we an appropriate fit? I mean, if you're a place-based partnership that happens to be within one state, that's absolutely fine. If you're working on a legislative issue across a state, I would just read our definition of a partnership for purposes of this fund to see if you would be eligible. 7, the Nature Conservancy methodology is referenced in the RFP. It doesn't cover the whole United States. Are we still eligible to apply? And is there any other guidance? We wanted to list issues like habitat connectivity, climate resilience as the kind of priority issues that are important to our funders and important to the future ecological health of the United States. These are not deal breakers, the TNC methodology does not explicitly need to be used. Can multiple organizations from a partnership submit applications and then pool Catalyst Fund support? I'm sorry, but the answer is no. We're really looking at $25,000 per partnership. If the fund grows inside, we would be more than happy to modify that current restriction. Next question. If we receive Catalyst Fund support to hire a coordinator for a specific set of activities in a specific geography, can that coordinator also do additional work, including establishing new partnerships in other regions? You know, we would anticipate that the Catalyst Fund monies would go towards the coordinator advancing the strategic plan and conservation objectives of a specific conservation partnership. I don't think we're looking to fund, you know, a partnership starting circuit rider. That being said, if a partnership within its strategic plan is trying to expand its geography or is next door to another partnership and they want to build their relationships and sort of work on some nesting. If it's part of a strategic plan of a partnership, I think that would be a different story. Is the prioritization between funding specific activities or funding to support capacity building more broadly? As we tried to reflect in the chart, the appendix chart, we recognize that there are multiple activities and processes that need to be advanced simultaneously to build a partnership. You know, there comes that point where you need someone waking up every day and they're not doing this on top of another full-time job, which is probably what most of you are doing right now. But you have a coordinator who's thinking about convening that next meeting, moving forward the conservation planning, starting up the e-news, you know, how's the governance structure advancing. So any combination of activities or project costs is fine as long as you justify them in your proposal. You know, every landscape is different, and we'd like you all to think long and hard about how you can best make a difference in this grant period with this size grant, and build forward momentum and start to build these enduring partnerships that will make a difference and build that social capital on the landscape. If we are a long-term established partnership, can we apply for funding to start a new project or working group? We are generally prioritizing partnerships in the building stage. We do recognize that there are partnerships that are in the conserving stage who may have become a bit dormant, don't have the kind of robust funding that we would hope you would have at the conserving stage. So it is possible for you to apply, but you should know that we'll be taking a very hard look at proposals that come in from conserving partnerships and whether that's the best place to put our limited resources. More details on match. There's a fairly long section on match in the RFP. It does not need to be secured at the time of the pre-proposal, but you'll see in the pre-proposal budget form, we ask for a list of where you anticipate finding match. And if the match does not materialize, there would not be a second year or additional funding provided to that applicant. As I mentioned earlier, the 50% of the one-to-one match can be an in-kind donation of time or other from the partners. The other half should be a cash match. It can be from the partners through dues or other contributions. It can be other philanthropic sources. It can be state or federal funding, as long as it hasn't been spent before the start of the grant period. And as I mentioned earlier, the match is not required for the Indigenous community applicants, although if they have matched, that will certainly be viewed favorably. The last question on my list is, are partnerships that work across international boundaries eligible to apply? We recognize that there are a number of wonderful partnerships that cross the borders into Canada or Mexico. Our funding sources do not stretch outside of the United States, but if you are a cross-border effort and you would like to apply for funding that will advance the U.S. Part of your partnership, that is certainly acceptable. So that is the end of the questions we received during registration. And now I'd like to turn to John to help us address the ones that have come in the last half an hour.
Great, thank you, Emily. We have probably about a dozen questions that have come in so far while we've been on the webinar, and I encourage folks to continue to use the question and answer icon in their toolbar to submit questions that you'd like addressed during the webinar. We'll start with one that again gets to the question of stages of partnership development, Emily. And what if some of our characteristics are typical of the building stage and some characteristics are typical of the conserving stage? Is that a problem, and how do we think about that?
Well, again, there's no easy way to draw a firm line between building and conserving. So I think that would, I think you would certainly be eligible, and we just take a hard look at, how well have you thought out what you plan to do during the grant period, and how impactful will it be both during the grant period and in setting you up to move more firmly into the conserving stage going forward.
Great. And a question, Emily, about application process. Do you have to submit a pre-proposal to apply?
Yes. And
just to underscore and expand upon that slightly, it's a two-stage application process. The pre-proposal stage is an open call, and full proposals will be invited from a select number of pre-proposal submissions.
That's correct.
Go ahead, sorry.
No.
All right. If academic research is not an eligible cost, but would that pertain to hiring an intern from a tribal college? Would that also not be an eligible cost?
If the intern was hired to fulfill a coordinating function and to advance specific conservation objectives, as long as it was tied to the goals and advancing the partnership, I think that would be absolutely fine. But if it's hiring an intern just generally, it just has to be tied, obviously, to advancing the partnership per the RFP.
Can Catalyst Fund monies be used for trail protection?
Probably not, unless it was part of a package, perhaps, where some of the outreach and reaching new stakeholders had to do with trail activities in the focal areas of your partnership. We'd have to see some dots connected there, but generally just trail protection and maintenance, no.
Would a established partnership that is looking to expand its geographic focus be an appropriate fit for the Catalyst Fund?
I think that's certainly, similar to an earlier question, established partnership, but they have a new goal that's going to be really additive to what they're trying to achieve on the ground. I would say that would be eligible.
Can, if a partnership had a non-Indigenous proposal submitted, could a Indigenous partner within the partnership submit a proposal to the Indigenous community track of the Catalyst Fund as well, and work on separate but related activities within a partnership?
Given that we are capping total grant monies to any one partnership at $25,000, I would say if the two grants didn't total more than $25,000, and for some reason they wanted to apply separately, I think they could do that. But it gets back to the previous question: can multiple applicants pool multiple requests and end up with $50,000 grant? The answer to that is no. But yeah, but it could be interesting to have an Indigenous application and a non-Indigenous partner with some clarity that they're applying together, and it's not going to total more than $25,000 total.
We have a couple questions about sort of partnership governance, Emily, and I'm going to try to sort of thread the needle on them and see if I can put one question to you. How does the Catalyst Fund think about partnership governance, and is it more favorable to have that more formalized, do we draw a distinction between sort of formalized governance structures for partnerships versus informal, and are there any requirements therein?
No, there are no requirements there, particularly as we are focusing on the building stage. I'm guessing that many partnerships will still have a somewhat informal governance structure. And, particularly as you build horizontal collaboration, sometimes it's best not to have any more governance in the early stages than you need. Why get in the way of people who are increasingly working well together? And then over time, you can build your steering committees and your charter and whatever it is you need. But we are agnostic on that, as long as it's working in your location for the group of people you have around the table.
Great, thanks, Emily. Another sort of batch of questions revolving around partners and number of partners. Is there a definition for the purposes of the Catalyst Fund around number of partners, and could a partnership be between one nonprofit and one or two municipal, state, federal partners?
You know, it's hard to pick a number. But if you read through the definition of partnership that we have, obviously there are many valuable kinds of partnerships, and we had to choose what it was we wanted to fund. But if you look at place-based partnerships and building that inclusive social capital on the ground, horizontally structured, those definitions would favor partnerships where there are quite a few people in the room. I don't want to say 4 is too few, but you know, there's picture who do you want on your landscape? Who are you reaching out to your landowners? Are you reaching your land trusts? Are you so we're looking for that kind of horizontal, inclusive, collaborative, more than a think tank of 3 or 4 organizations or entities. No, it may be at the building stage. You may not have everyone in the room yet that you would like to have in the room. And we certainly understand that as well. But we would then expect to see, as part of your partnership building, some indication that you are building something bigger.
Great. I have a question here around partnerships focused on land acquisition versus urban partnerships that are developing, improving parks, and otherwise thinking about natural resources in urban areas. Do we draw a distinction there? Do we prioritize one over the other?
No, there's some just wonderful urban efforts connecting people in cities more to nature, both in and beyond the city boundaries itself, and connecting people to their ecosystems and where they get their clean water and their clean air and their food and so forth, and building constituencies for nature that we desperately need to build. So either is fine.
Great. A question around the use of Catalyst Fund dollars for filling data gaps and doing conservation planning for a group of species and their habitats across a particular state. Would that be an appropriate fit for the Catalyst Fund?
I think a state research project, that sounds very valuable, but that does not sound to me like a place-based partnership.
Do we have any, is there anything to offer in terms of guidelines or restrictions on what would be an appropriate outreach strategy? And for instance, would involving environmentally focused artists be a appropriate creative engagement strategy for a landscape conservation partnership?
I think with projects like that, we would just like to see the dots connected. So what is the purpose of that? Is it going to reach new stakeholders who then support the partnership in some way that then moves the partnership closer to achieving conservation objectives on the ground? We would just want to see how that fits into the broader strategy and why that project and why now.
Great, thanks, Emily. Does the Catalyst Fund support direct on-the-ground project work, for instance, habitat restoration, invasive species removal?
No.
Does the Catalyst Fund support educational programming?
In the strict sense, probably no.
This is a good question, Emily, and I'm going to try to provide some context so it's broadly applicable across all potential applicants. If you have a fiscal sponsor that's submitting the pre-proposal on your behalf, the pre-proposal asks for annual budget, approximate annual budget of the applicant. What are we looking for there? Would it be the entire budget of the fiscal sponsor? Would it be a specific chapter within that fiscal sponsor, the broader organization? What figure are we looking for there?
Yeah, no, that is a great question. So in crafting the pre-proposal, we tried to keep it pretty streamlined because we know your time is scarce and valuable. So we do not ask for a lot of attachments and so forth, but we do ask for the budget of the partnership if there is an annual budget, and we do ask without requiring an attachment the budget of the applicant organization. This gives us some sense of whether the organization is fiscally sound and can support administering this grant. What I would suggest is that if it's a national organization with chapters or whatever, to submit for the regional chapter that's submitting the application. Whatever office would be administering the grant, provide the budget of that office.
Great, very helpful, Emily, thank you. A question about a collaborative working to expand and partner with an additional collaborative that focuses on water quality. Does that move the applicant too far away from conservation to be relevant to the Catalyst Fund? I guess the broader question there being, is conservation, what are the priorities? Is conservation a priority or additional ecosystem services? How are we thinking about that?
Well, I think watershed protection is certainly one of the major reasons conservation partnerships get started. There's so many ecological and cultural issues that need to be addressed at the scale nature functions, and certainly watersheds is one of those, and water quality. If there's a partnership, I'm sorry, looking to expand and reach those new stakeholders and connect with a watershed group, expand the partnership, and it will create a stronger body of advocates on behalf of that landscape. I would say that would be an eligible application. I think This fund is in its first year. The criteria may seem broad or complex, but we're all dealing with a very complex set of issues as we expand to community-grounded but landscape-scale conservation. So we're all working at multiple scales. We're working often in nested partnerships. There may be partnerships that want to connect to another partnership to make an Uber partnership. I think all of these are potentially, wonderful, wonderful applications as long as you justify it in your pre-proposal and explain why reaching out to the watershed stakeholders or expanding your partnership to include that watershed group or landscape is going to advance your partnership and help you achieve conservation goals in the short and longer term.
Great. Emily, we have a couple of questions of maybe some key figures slip past some folks, so hopefully we can move through a couple of these sort of rapid fire. First, can you repeat the indirect cost cap?
Yeah, it's 12%. That's dictated by our funder, and it's stated again on the budget template when you go to apply in our online portal.
And the amount of funding available total in this grant cycle is?
This year we will be giving out $335,000, yeah, 335,000. And we will be looking for a mix of applications that meet our criteria, and we'll be looking for some sort of geographic balance. There, we're not going to fund 15 projects in Mississippi. And beyond that, I think the RFP is as clear as we can be what we're looking for and what our evaluation criteria will be. And apologies to anyone from Mississippi on this call.
And applicants, can they apply for more than one? Can they submit more than one pre-proposal?
Yes, if you like to, or you might email John and see if one would be a more appropriate ask.
Yeah, and just to clarify, an additional layer to that, if an landscape conservation partnership is not a 501c3 and not have a 501c3 applicant applying on their behalf, what we're focused on is the landscape conservation partnership. So any partnership would only be eligible to receive funding for one project. It's conceivable, I suppose, that an applicant could be applying on behalf of multiple landscape conservation partnerships that could receive funding. Would Catalyst Fund support collaborative restoration work that has both on-the-ground outcomes and is policy related?
Is policy related?
Yeah.
I'm not
sure. Let's break those into two.
Yeah. We're not authorized to give money for any sort of political lobbying. If there's a specific restoration activity, I think we'd like to see why it is advancing the partnership's conservation goals and how it's also building momentum for the partnership overall, so that it's not just a one-off project.
if there's an entity that is involved in multiple partnerships, would it be problematic? Would it be difficult for? Would that influence its chances of securing funding if it was a partner on multiple partnerships that were submitting applications to the Catalyst Fund?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we understand, again, that there are nested partnerships and there are, certain organizations that might be a major partner in multiple ones. So we'll be judging each partnership proposal, independently and for the quality of the proposal. That being said, we will be looking for some geographic diversity and a mix of proposals across the landscape. So that would be factored in, but it certainly does not bar an organization from being involved in multiple partnerships or even making two applications on behalf of two separate partnerships.
Are the standards and priorities and general framework of both the general and Indigenous communities RFPs consistent and the same?
The objectives are identical. The matching fund is optional for the Indigenous community RFP. Also, the Indigenous community RFP does not include the Appendix chart, so it doesn't go into that level of detail, but it does have several paragraphs that express the same sentiment that you see in the general RFP, which is we're looking for partnerships that have invested in trust building and relationship building, partnerships that have a vision and goals, partnerships that can show they, can really make good use of this money over the grant period. So it's a bit streamlined, but the objectives are identical.
Great, thanks. What about engaging public around climate adaptation data, and both on tribal and off-reservation partners? Is that an appropriate fit for the Catalyst Fund?
Engaging the public. Well, I think a good communications person would tell you there is no general public, but it would probably be a stronger proposal if the partnership identified target audiences and why specifically they wanted to do outreach to those audiences around this topic, and then how they would weave it into their partnership going forward.
Are 1 and 2 year proposals going to be considered equally, or do we have a preference one way or the other on that?
We do not have a preference. If you have a strong through line of what you'd like to do over 2 years and a strong justification, we will accept proposals for $25,000 to be spread out over 2 years. If you're feeling a little bit shaky about what you do during a second year, you can apply for a grant for this year, and then you could come back in year 2 or year 3 and request an additional grant. Again, as long as that total over a 3-year period does not exceed $25,000. Yeah. It may be with a building partnership that you really have a $10,000 set of activities that you think will really light a fire under this partnership and really be exciting and move it forward, but you're not entirely sure what you're going to be ready for in year 2. So that would be an example. Maybe hold off and come back.
There's a well-established partnership that's been operating 20 plus years and has multiple full-time staff. Is that an appropriate fit for the Catalyst Fund?
It's possible, but we are hoping that partnerships that have that kind of staffing also have the resources to find the other funding that is out there. So it's possible, but I probably wouldn't catapult that application to the top of the list. And I'll say one more thing on matching funds, which is a bit related. We wrestled with whether to require matching funds, and remember, only 50% of it has to be in some sort of cash. But we are really hoping that these funds will help you build long-term partnerships that are tethered to your landscape and do good work for many years and decades to come. And so by requiring a match, we are hoping it will allow you to go out to your local and regional funders, maybe in a way that they didn't understand was necessary before, didn't see they're not funding in this area, but this will allow you to perhaps find new pockets of funding that will endure through more local and regional support going forward.
Great. I think I have two final questions queued up, Emily, and then we can wrap as we're approaching the top of the hour. Outreach to individual landowners, would that be an eligible use of Catalyst funds?
I think reaching out to new stakeholders, making those relationships and connections in the context of a plan. What are you going to do with that, and why are you reaching out to them? And but if half of your landscape is in farmland and you're not talking to farmland owners, that's a problem. So absolutely, outreach, convenings around targeted stakeholders, developing resources, or yes, that would be eligible.
And a final question, is catalyzing county or city planning processes and community dialogues about planning an eligible activity for Catalyst Fund proposals?
Ooh, possibly. Again, I think we'd want to see how that processes is going to help your partnership. But if it's sort of untethered to a partnership and advancing specific goals, and through that process, maybe connecting with new stakeholders and strengthening the overall conservation effort on your landscape overall. I see a bit of a gray area there, so I would just work hard on explaining exactly why you want to do this and how it will be partnership building and value added to long-term conservation on your landscape. Okay, well, I think that does bring us to the end of this webinar. Please know we'll be posting a recording of this webinar on the Catalyst Fund page of our website. John and I want to thank you for your participation today and your interest in the Catalyst Fund. So please email any remaining questions well before April 26th. And thank you again. We very much look forward to hearing from you.